Welcome to another episode of Just One More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey.
Hey.
You can find us online at justonemorefix.com or on Twitter at justonemorefix. If you like us, you can support us at Patreon, and you can give us a rating and review at Apple Podcasts or wherever you find us at. In this episode, we're going to talk about creating character conflict. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix.
Michelle Ely from the Starling Tribune, an Arrow TV show fan podcast, part of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the show you're checking out now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other amazing geeky shows at GonnaGeekNetwork.com.
Welcome to Just More Fix. One quick announcement before we get things rolling today. As you may have heard, hopefully, that we have a Kickstarter going right now for Zine Quest on Kickstarter.com. So if you head over there and search Three Sisters, or you go to the link in the show notes, you can head over to our Zine Quest there and check it out. You can also go to episode 140 and check out our game storming episode where me and Lacey sort of sit down and sharpen some ideas from her game that sort of sparked this idea. So as of right now, as we record this, it is 183% funded. So it is a done deal and it is happening. And that is pretty awesome. We posted some stretch goals because we've done better than we expected. So big thank you to all of our Patreon supporters and Kickstarter backers that are out there. Really, really appreciate the support that you guys show us and making this thing a reality. So head over to Kickstarter.com and check out our Three Sisters Zine Quest zine. There's a lot of zines in that. Right on. All right. So today we're going to talk about character conflict and creating character conflict. And we've talked about this a whole lot when it comes to sort of like player versus player conflict, right? But that's not really where we're going today. Today we're going to talk about whether or not it's okay for the game master to deliberately cause or build into the story conflict between the players, since the game master or storyteller, whatever your choice word is for your game, has control of the entire world, right?
In theory, yeah.
I mean, the vast majority of the world, we'll say. So I guess we'll just start off by saying, what do you think? Do you think this is okay to do?
Yes.
Okay.
Hard stop.
Hard stop. That's it. Push stop
yes,
now.
I feel like it's I get like not wanting to make people uncomfortable or cause like character disputes that become player disputes.
Right.
But like conflict really like of interest, and they help to story
right
away.
I feel like it's central to any good story and any good like ensemble cast or duo or whatever it is. There's this sort of the ones that you remember the most have this tension between some of the characters, and that's what you sort of remember. So they're always pushing towards some central goal, but there's always this tension between two characters.
Conflicting interest, cool as well, right? Because then you get to see like, okay, well, who's going to win? We pull in, when both people are pulling in opposite direction, who's going in that contest, and then what are the results of that resolution?
Right. So I think it's pretty easy to say I kind of thought we might run through a couple different games and briefly mention, because some of them it kind of makes sense already. Like we talk a lot about Vampire. It's very clearly built into Vampire, right?
Right.
I couldn't foresee a game of Vampire where you're not at least working against one another in small ways. Like, to me, that's not really Vampire at that point, right? You're not, like, if that's how you want to play it, that's fine. But in my worldview of World of Darkness, we're always sort of, we may be in a coterie and we may be trying to overthrow the prince, but I'm going to land on top.
Wacky to anybody who's actually in finance is what I imagine the stock market. like we're on the same team, like we're on the same finance company, but I want to be like better at it than you are. And so like I'm trying to like snipe you without toppling the whole organization. Like
Yes.
That's probably not what real life looks like. I don't know, but
right on. So in our World of Darkness games, though, we come at that game knowing that, right? And it's sort of a given that we're going to be going at each other, maybe not right away, but at some point in the storyline we are, right? And I know, at least for me, when I'm running the games, I am deliberately trying to put challenges and plot situations in front of the players to where it's drawing different people's loyalties in different directions, right? So let's just say that your and Carrie's character are in a coterie, right? And you're both trying to overthrow the prince, but maybe your character has a special bond with the sheriff and her character doesn't like the sheriff. So then what I'm going to do is try and find a way to leverage that loyalty or disloyalty to create a position where, well, how are you two going to sort of negotiate what's going to happen with the sheriff now? Do you know what I'm saying? And so I guess what I would say is that in those cases, I think it's okay to manipulate the situation to push the characters into where that conflict is going to come out. But where I think if you're doing it in such a way to where you as the game master or storyteller are making the decision for what's going to happen, then I feel like you've definitely gone into some territory where that's a problem, right? At that point, you're making decisions for the players because you're weighting one side of the equation. Whereas if it's just you put the situation out there and then it's on the players to either choose to stay loyal or choose to betray or choose to be bought out or whatever it looks like.
The boons that are used for social currency in the game work well for that too. So maybe someone who is the rival of a coterie mate is owed by you, and they call in that boon, and it is a favor such that it will require you causing some kind of hardship to this person, and it will be on this other person's account that they already dislike.
Yeah.
And then the extra 10 that will add to the relationship if and when it comes out.
Absolutely. Yeah. The boon currency in Vampire is a great example of that, because if you're actively tracking the boons that the NPCs have when it relates to the characters, right, it can change the power dynamic. Yeah, exactly. It can change the way everything looks hugely, right? And then if you really want to get deep into the weeds about the politics of Vampire, you can be playing some like full-on 3D chess style stuff, right? Of where this person is cashing in this boon for this to do that, with this thing over here to create this problem that they are then going to solve, and you can totally manipulate that. And I think those are great moments, provided that it's driving towards some ultimate goal for the story, right? So if there's some kind of cool revelation that you find out that maybe this prince or seneschal or whoever it is has manipulated this entire situation to create this conflict, and unfortunately, and this is the way I like a lot of my vampire games to go, you're just caught up in the shuffle of the politics of elders.
So you're saying you've never dropped a casual conflict bomb just to see what would happen? Because
I don't know if I would say to see what would happen, but what I will say is that I have thought of several conflicts that I know would create problems and then just sort of put them on the shelf. And when I had a moment where I didn't know what to do or was feeling uninspired for a session or whatever, it was like, cool, let's get this Molotov cocktail and let's go cause a riot. Do you know what I'm saying? And so I would say yes and no. Like there was a little bit of forethought, but it was like, let's just see what happens when the moment comes and there's a lull in the story and we'll see what happens. All right. So when it comes to World of Darkness in general, right? Vampire or whatever, I think we're all pretty much on the same page in the way that game kind of works because it's part of the conceit of the world, right? So I'm going to go to like PBTA stuff and specifically our Night Witches game, right?
Powered by the Apocalypse. There are some systems that build at least a small amount of character conflict into the character creation during
and not only in the character creation, but also it's built into the mechanics.
For that one, it is.
That I can spend these points, do things, or get things from you, provided that you agree to it. And if you don't agree, then I get sometimes more leverage, right?
That doesn't always mean creating conflict player characters.
No. But in like games like Monster Hearts, it kind of does. So
there's like that.
Yeah.
But like
I see what you're saying.
As a game master.
You're right. But I guess in the case of Monster Hearts, you are kind of there to facilitate high school melodrama, which is like that's also in that same vein with World of Darkness. It's kind of what you're signed up for, right? The game master should be setting up those kind of conflicts. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of how I did this in Night Witches, and some of them I'm almost certain all of these have happened, or the precursors for them have all happened. So I don't believe there'll be any spoilers here, but in that game, there is a Politruck officer who's sort of like a commissar of the political police that are attached to the armed units, or not the armed units, the army units, right? So this character, her name is Sveta, and she is just, I don't know, bad. How would you describe?
Yeah, I mean, she's like, absolutely looking out for number one, not capable of seeing any options at all, and us user. So
right. So as the game went on, her sort of role in the game has changed, right? Like she started off just being this regular hard-ass Politruck officer, right? And then it morphed into something where she began manipulating Vera, which is Carrie's character. And then that took on its own life. And then it seemed like Vera's character was kind of like okay in a way with the way things were progressing, but that was just sort of through manipulation and I feel like that character being young and naive a little bit. And then it evolved even further and further, right? But where it ties into creating character or conflict with the characters is that character Sveta I was deliberately putting Carrie into compromised position to where her loyalty was challenged among her peers, among the other players, right, that are in the section of Night Witches. So there were times where there were choices about who would get sent on a mission, in a mission that wasn't your guys' expertise, right? And then it was serious conflict between, the loyalty between Yulia, your character, and Vera, and who was going to get sent where, and questioning, there's a lot of just, what, you're looking at me like they're part of the thing when Valentina didn't go on the mission and stuff.
Oh, Carrie, my character.
No, but it was this thing where the consequences of it built up to where it was, whose fault was it, right? And then so you were blaming yourself and Carrie's character was blaming herself for the outcome of what happened. And then it sort of has slowly built this tension and has started to boil over now as the game is coming, approaching the end of the war, right? And I guess even more so than in like a World of Darkness game, there are very few NPCs that have a lot of consistent camera time in that game, right? And she is one of them. And so she has been a tool that has been used over and over again to sort of push people, right? And to add stress on people and to manipulate people to where there's always this question about, do I look like I'm being loyal? Do I not? How far do I go? What do I, do you know what I'm saying? Like interviews and all this kind of stuff. And I don't feel like it felt like, in my perspective, it never felt like it was a cudgel. Do you know what I'm saying?
I'm trying to think that created conflict between player characters.
So there was
not just a personal conflict or
So there was a point where I believe, it's been a long time with a lot of games and a lot of sessions, but there was a point where Vera chose Sveta over the group of you.
Well, maybe.
Okay. And it hasn't been a lot, but I guess what it has, the one of the ways, okay, so in this instance, the case that the largest part of the case is that Sveta is applying direct pressure to Vera's character, Carrie's character, right? And that the fallout of that pressure has trickled down onto all of you, right? And then there have been points where Vera has been forced to make choices about things, right? And she chose sometimes Sveta and sometimes she chose, the rest of the section, right? And then there have also been times, and I don't know if you felt it or not, where when the rest of the section went up against Sveta, I don't know, because there was some knowledge that you guys had that Sveta had something over Vera's character, right? Over Vera. So it was like, how hard do you want to push? Because now is she going to use that leverage? Do you know what I'm saying? I don't know if that ever occurred to you to be concerned about that or not, but.
I mean, not so, like, it seems to me that she took a special interest in our group in general.
Right.
Like, but she's also a lit truck, so.
Right.
I'd hate from KVD,
right.
that there's an exceptionality other, kind of like the top.
Right. No, I agree.
Yeah, Carrie's character that definitely led to group.
And then in addition to just Sveta's character, there's all the pressure of the war and death and not coming home and loss and all of that, right? Mm-hmm. And those are all external factors that are all manipulated by me, right? So you guys get to choose what mission you go on, but after that, all of the pressure comes from me. And so I guess Night Witches is unique in that case. You know what I mean? Because when you go into a dungeon and you're fighting things, like the pressure doesn't seem the same, but functionally it's not really any different. Do you know what I mean?
No, function, it is different because there is some harm that you can tick off, but there's also marks that you can take, which are functionally drastically different. They're like taking damage in a way that
that's true. Okay.
Some of them are social, mental things, and ours are not. This is the last one die, basically.
Right.
But they're mostly terrible. Mm-hmm. And a lot of cases you're like, okay, well, can I suffer the harm instead of having to take the...
So let me ask you this, because this is kind of bring this back around to the premise of this, where we started with here. Setting the NKVD and Sveta aside, right? So I have complete control of the war and all that kind of stuff as the game progresses, more or less. And the last session we just recorded, there was a lot of conflict. And the session before that, there was a lot of conflict among your guys' group. So do you feel like that is me as a game master manipulating the situation to cause conflict? Or is that just something that would have happened no matter what because it's built into the game that way?
I don't know. Some of it we do to ourselves just out of fun.
Right.
And some of it's built into the game. But definitely, like, the situation I'm thinking of that's sort of, like, directly obvious, where Galia yells at the Nina, and Nina runs back to her friend.
Oh, yeah.
Dasha, who's a player. Uh-huh. And then Dasha confronts Galia about what happened. And
I forgot about that one.
And then that is terrible.
Right.
So that's, like a single NPC action directly leading towards player conflict and almost just a change in attitude between the two of them.
Oh, yeah.
Almost abruptly. We were good, and now we're not good.
Yeah. I forgot about that one. I guess there's other ways that I had things where, and this is true of most Powered by the Apocalypse games, where when something bad happens because of a failed roll, I get to choose where that damage goes or how it goes wrong. And in those moments, I have deliberately chosen to choose the things that made things the most dramatic, the most intense, or would cause the most problem, right? But I feel like that's built into the way that, and not as it's a flaw, because it makes the gameplay better, right? But it's built into it that way, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So all of that is together, right? Those are a couple games that are built for that, right?
Pretty much all Powered by the Apocalypse games.
Yeah.
Bluebeard's Bride is like that.
Yes.
Developed a relation to sisters. Pick basically which one, and I'm like not getting along with, trust,
Which one of my fist bumps with and which my fist punches with, right?
Right. Yeah. And then that creates interesting dynamics later on that if you're able to wrap it around at once.
Mashed is that way. Almost all of them really are. So, but setting aside them as that's built into the premise of the game, right? Let's reel it back to some OSR, LOTFP style games, right? Do you feel like it makes sense to do it there, or is it because it's such a different style of game that you shouldn't do it there? Do you know what I'm saying?
I don't accept that answer, that you shouldn't do it because it's not there. Because, if you think about really great fantasy stories,
Conan.
No. There's a background there, and there are members of the party who are closer with certain other members, and that can shift as time goes on, but you have this baggage starting out that's, very much present from the beginning of the story. Think about your first Dragonlance book, right? When they're all kind of trickling back into this town together, and there's two or three that have already been there, and then they're meeting their other friends as they go along and sort of finding out what everybody's been up to, and you can tell that some relationships are strained or tense, and we're only accepting this person into our group because he's his brother, and we're only accepting this one in because he's with him from the beginning, even though I've never been that great in the past, and and you end up with this hodgepodge group because of those conflicts.
Well, and in terms of telling a story, if everyone gets along, it's okay, we came together to fight Sauron. We sang Tra-la-la and skipped across the countryside until we got to the Big Eye and then destroyed the ring. Do you know, that's...
Yeah, but no, so it's not like that, right?
Exactly.
You have Sam, I'm coming along to protect Frodo.
Right.
And you have Merry and Pippin, they're each other's ride or die, and they're just kind of along for the fun because they want to leave the Shire. And
ride or die, Merry! Ride or die!
Then you have Gimli, who's there largely because of pride. And then you have Aragorn and Legolas, who somehow already have this relationship together that nobody else is really aware of. You got Gandalf, who's I know you all. You're going to listen because I know what's up.
I think the example of Frodo and Sam is a great example of it because there are so many moments, environmental and through Gollum, that are really making those two characters, bang their heads together because of the situations that they're put in. And that's a great example of it because ideally, I think in that situation, Gollum or Smeagol would be an NPC,
right? Yeah,
and that's a great example of it with those two.
Seeds of doubt in that relationship.
Well, and that's a great example because that's really the triumph of friendship between those two characters. And if that conflict didn't exist, it would just be, so he's my buddy and he's always been here, but we haven't been through anything.
Well, and that relationship isn't there to put strain on if it's never set up in the first place.
Right.
Okay, maybe if you guys sat down and you played all these characters for a year from scratch, starting with zero backstory, well, then you'd have a backstory, and then we could, you could just create some kind of relationship. Start with a couple quick stories about things you've been through, whatever
it is. Yeah, I agree.
And then you have that out the gate to kind of push on.
So I have one other example that comes to mind that actually was played out at a table that I was at is that I always found it interesting when you have a mixed party of good and evil characters. This is something you touched on with Dragonlance, with Rassilon and all the other characters, right? So essentially, depending on what part of the timeline you're in, he's an evil wizard or like a neutral but not good wizard. Do you know what I mean? You know, and in terms of reading stories, I always found it interesting how you could have characters that were not good with good characters and still working towards, they're there together because they have a common goal, right? So that's what we always tried to put together, is we found a way to have some deliberately actually evil in terms of alignment characters, or whether they were priests of an evil god or something, but there was a goal that had to be accomplished, and it was like these characters came together to get this goal accomplished because there was a greater problem that they had to solve or whatever it was, right? And it was always fun to see the characters and players try to figure out and negotiate how to solve the problems, because killing the other character was never an option, because you had to have their skill set or their expertise or whatever it was. So just offing them wasn't, you know, like killing them in their sleep because they're a bad guy wasn't an option. Likewise, killing them in their sleep because they're a good guy wasn't an option, you know? And so once you have that game established and it's going, then I felt like that's the themes of this game. So it's my job to put roadblocks in the character's way that they have to overcome that challenge them in sort of this good versus evil morality, right? Nothing
Which
ever.
Which is what we should be doing, right?
Yes.
It shouldn't just be a simple, okay, well, it happened, and so now we're an adventuring party, and everybody sort of ends up being alignment neutral. Like, no, you should be challenging them with obstacles that question those morals, like a good example.
And then the challenges that you put in front of them shouldn't be so clearly good or so clearly evil, because there's no challenge in that, right? The rub for ethics and morals and what's good or bad is always in the middle, you know, and that's where it's interesting because there's debate there.
Classic ethic train on like a,
right.
like a covered wagon there. Where evil's guy's like, I don't know.
Pull the switch or
just pull the switch. There's one guy over here and two over there. What's the big deal?
Right.
And then your paladin's like, no.
And those games were really, really fun. And then there was also this aspect of where you had two characters coming together, and generally speaking, they were both strong-willed characters of some experience. So then they're like, well, hey, how much would it be a win for me and a feather in my cap if I got this good guy / bad guy to come over to the good guy / bad guy side, you know? So there's always this tension of them going back and forth about, you know, well, I'm a priest of whatever it is, you know, and you should come over here because whatever, and, you know, and vice versa.
I think the time and effort is a good motivator in those scenarios, right? So like maybe somebody has a shortcut that makes this mission easier or less time consuming, what have you, but the trade-off is doing something that is somewhat malicious.
Questionable.
Yes. So then you can have the debate, like, this is definitely not something you would want to do if you were on team good, but maybe time is of the essence. So
but
now I can make that argument like,
definition
well,
of your railroad example, though.
Right.
So we can, you know, obviously you don't want to do something so, you know, bludgeony as like, well, we can sacrifice 12 babies now, or we can, like, come on now, you know. But there's some kind of cost that goes along with that, and that's exactly what you're talking about with your train switch debate, you know, like,
well,
which one
it's
do you
set up
do?
in the worm scenario too, right?
Yes.
Like, do you want to try save the lost cause quarantine miner or do you want to chalk them up to lives lost and try and save the room in town if you can?
That's a good plug there. No, but it is a great example of it. I completely forgot about it because part of that came out of the debate that we had in a live tabletop exercise about public health during the Ebola thing, when we were writing protocols for how to deal with this. And it was like sitting there and having an honest discussion and being like, no, this isn't individual. This is public health. So I'm sorry for this guy's luck, but this is public health. We're talking about thousands and millions of lives, not about Dave, the guy that got Ebola.
With like coronavirus, people are like talking about some people that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they can and they should.
Terrifying.
And if you're the one that's sick, you should be happy that that's happening so that you're not infecting all the people that you love and care about in your life.
True that. It's a scary reality, but it's a cool thing that was built into that scenario because it kind of came out of a weird time. Do you know what I mean? Like, it took a long time to come out of me, but it harkened back to those moments because there were a lot of surreal moments when that all happened. Ooh, so, all right. Anyway, right on. So, do you have anything else to wrap this one up, or any other game systems to mention? I know we didn't hit a ton, but
wheel.
Okay.
With the circle relation setup of addition. I mean, I suppose it could any, right?
Well, like if your character is a kind of a scoundrel roguish character, and in your circles you have scoundrel and roguish kind of characters, and my character could be some kind of knightly lawman do-gooder. And
well, that's kind of just back to, are you really?
Well, yeah, but I think it's also yeah, but I think it could be one of those things where people are coming up to speak to your character that you know because they're in your circle, you know, and then it would create, because maybe I'm not actually going to do anything to you about it because nothing has happened, but then I always know, oh, you're a friend with Tommy Thumbs or whoever it is, do you know what I'm saying? You know, so you can kind of push on that more and more, or the exact opposite. You know, some hard ass lawman walks up to me that you know that guy is just a brutal lawman, and he is known to go out and get criminals and just come back with ears and say, I don't know, they resisted, you know. So it works kind of both ways in that case.
So we talked about alignment and we talked about top politics, but we didn't talk about the most obvious form of conflict ever created by humankind: love.
Oh, yeah.
And so we sort of created this mess together when I ran the Revenant game, but you and Kurt both had player characters who the object of your affections was the same NPC. And that
game was such a disaster.
Well, but
so
you guys had kind of a similar. Well, you had basically the exact same goal in mind.
Yeah.
But you kind of had to help each other get past all the steps at the beginning, and then it was sort of going to be like the ultimate throwdown at the end to see who's going to get the girl, or if she's going to just be like, "Nope, suckers."
Or at that point, it was vampire, wasn't it? She get turned. It was such a disaster of a game. So much fun.
but yeah, just love and relation in general are a good way to pull on things. Even if it's just, you know, the old bros before hoes argument. It doesn't even have to be like both people liking the same girl. It can just be that that relationship putting a strain on.
You never hang out with us anymore. You never go on adventures anymore, man. Ever since you met that tavern girl.
You didn't even go to the last Goblin Village raid.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it can be that basic if you want.
Yeah. No. It's just what
or
I
it
mean.
Or it could be more of that, again, like Dragonlance or whatever. Mm-hmm. I haven't read that far. So
no, that's a great example of it where there is a character who has had a love interest when they were younger, and then time in life, and as it turns out, she becomes a chosen of an evil god or goddess, and becomes the sort of the general of one of the dragon armies. And so there's this tension where they're on opposite sides of a large conflict, and occasionally their paths actually cross where they're close enough to one another to exchange words. And it's always interesting when that happens. So, you know, it's a good way to have this conflict where you're far apart, but still, you know.
Well, and it affects the rest of the party in a way, even beyond just that interaction and the feels or whatever. It's the clouding of the judgment that happens where, like, someone who is normally a trustworthy, reliable decision maker has this massive blind spot when it comes to this one person. Well, and it's continually getting not only them, but the rest of the party in trouble. And then how are the other players dealing with that? Are they confronting the person? If they are, how does that go? Are they just continuing to be dragged along?
Well, another great example at our table has been Carrie had a character that fell in love with Bacchus, who is actually Kitty R's lieutenant. And you guys were all on the side of, you know, good. And yet she, you know, fell for this man and kept going back to him, stealing, you know, plans and doing enough, but not quite enough. Do you know what I mean? And it was a great moment of I don't know, sort of like I don't know how to describe, like a moment of triumph is for me as a storyteller, because I could watch all of you at the table being like, why don't you, you're right there, just kill him, and this whole part of the war is over, and we've got the problem solved. But she never did, and, you know, the conflict back and forth, you know what I mean? And at the same time, it wasn't just on her part, because there were points in the story where Bacchus could have done more and chose not to, you know, and so
it was slow, insidious betrayal.
It definitely was, but you know, so I mean, who are you gonna fear more? A person who's the commander of a dragon army, or this one lady, you know, who happens to be also a cleric, but nonetheless. So yeah, you know, no, I so many games, man. I just a flood of memories coming back as we talk about this. So
she was the cleric.
No, I know, yeah. I'm saying it was either choose to betray the Blue Dragon High Lord, chosen of a god, or goddess rather, or, you know, Carrie's character, who was a cleric, but not nearly at the same sort of power level and immediate danger to him. So it sort of made sense to always err on the side of the Blue Dragon Army in that case. Right on. All right, so should we just wrap this one up here, I think? Right on. So I know we kind of wandered all over this one, but I just wanted to kind of start off the idea with there are a lot of games where the structure of the game is built to have sort of an internal politics to it, and it's a part of the conceit of the game. But you can still bring those themes into any game that you have at your table, whether that's an OSR style game or just classic 5e, although classic isn't probably the right word for that. New 5e, whatever you want to say that. Did you have something?
Oh, yeah. No, actually, I forgot to into the idea. But maybe when you sit down to character creation, you could like scale for how much your player is okay with interfering in a conflict way. Like, so 0 maybe choose like,
Right.
you know, light, medium, or heavy, or like, you know, level 1, level 2, level 3, that sort of just something simple where you'd be like, okay, I give you the reins completely. Feel free to mess with me as much,
Right.
as often, and as hard as you like, to, okay, you know, a little bit, but mostly I want my character to be able to
Right.
do their own thing.
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, you know, not to start a whole nother thing, but like, I think that conversation needs to happen, but it's weird that we make a distinction between you can throw whatever obstacles you want in my way in sort of a like fighting and dice rolling conflict kind of a way, dragons and golems and giants and whatever, right? But when it comes to that kind of stuff, then we're like, well,
You say you can throw anything and people are okay, but then some people are like, character death, how could you?
well, I'm just like, don't get in
palm
that
to the
fight, man.
forehead.
If there's a dragon there and you can't handle it, just don't go in
No, I
there.
agree.
It's crisis
I agree.
averted, man. Live to
I
fight
just-
another day.
I don't like the idea where some are like, well, you need to ask consent for everything. I'm like, okay, well, but don't be like, is it okay if I do this specific thing? Because then, like, you've taken all the fun out of that plot idea.
True.
Like, if I tell you, yes, it's okay to mess with this character. If, you know, if
Right.
I cross the line, then I will tell you. But
Right. Well, and that's, I guess,
there's like a level of muckery better.
right. And then I think that gets back to something that we keep reiterating over and over again, which is just know your table and know your players and know the source material that you're drawing from, the inspiration where it comes, where your games come from, and draw on those themes because you probably have a similar connection as your players do to those stories and themes, right? So just lean on that stuff because we all largely have read most of the same stories, you know, to some degree or another. We're familiar with the material anyway, right? And if they're not, then just be like, hey, man, you should check this out. This is kind of the feel of the game that I'm going for, you know? And you can kind of lead people into the feel of the games that you're wanting to run without just telling them, hey, your two characters are going to have this friendship like Sam and Frodo, and you're just going to go through the ringer and it's going to be hell until you finally triumph at the end. Do you know what I mean? You know, no one wants to hear that and then play that game. That'd be terrible. You know what I mean? You know, I would rather just experience the game and be like, why won't you just get rid of the ring and kill this weirdo? Crisis solved, you know?
Well, and even like on a micro scale, right? So like if you picture the scene where Frodo is and Sam are both asleep and Gollum wakes up and puts the crumbs on his shirt. So if you were like, is it going to be okay if I do this? Then I would go into it differently. Like, you've robbed me of the proper sense of outrage that would happen in
Yeah.
that actual scenario. Whereas if I said, I'm level 3 all the way, do whatever you got to do, and then you did that, I'd be like, oh, you
No.
conniving.
That's exactly right, though. No, you've really hit something there. And it's
Like, not everybody wants to experience that sense of betrayal, but some people
but-
do. And
okay,
you're
so
just not
now-
going to get that without
now
the
hang
surprise,
on.
right?
Hang on a minute, and let me back this up just a couple steps, okay?
Okay.
You watch the movie, you see that happen, and you're like, oh, Gollum, oh, that's bad. And then you see Sam get frustrated, and that's the part where he goes down the stairs, you know, and then goes back up to get Frodo afterwards, right? And eventually rescues him, and then they're like, friendship is reunited and all that stuff. We all want that moment and that payoff. Like when we watch that movie, we see this gradual building to that moment of crumbs. And then that's the peak moment of despair and anger and frustration, and Sam stomps off. We all want that moment, right? Because we know that's where it's headed. We all know these stories, you know, to some degree or another, right? We know how the pacing of them goes. We know what's coming, like to one degree or another, we know what's coming next. And we want that payoff. So my argument would be is that I understand if people don't want to play that out, if you don't find that compelling, but I really don't see, like, I have a hard time understanding, like, unless that's just not what you want out of gaming, okay. But if you want some kind of any kind of emotional experience or emotional involvement in your games, that's what we're playing for. Like, that's what we're pushing towards. So long as the game master doesn't steal the final moment from you.
Well, some people just don't want any negativity at all. And some people, and I honestly get this, like I completely understand, some people cannot separate the line between where I'm frustrated as a character and I'm frustrated as a player. And it's important to know that about yourself. And if you're somebody that cannot handle that and you will be angry and grudge with people at the table, then you need to set your dial at a 1 for muckery.
Right. That's fair. I agree. And I can think of LARP experiences where we had, which we didn't even mention LARP, where how that's basically what that game is built off of, right? Mm-hmm. And especially in a game where you're playing with between 10 and 20, 25 players, you can really get to know the characters as a game master and draw those plots together to sort of really kind of butt people up against one another. And I've seen it where characters went head to head and someone has to lose, unfortunately. And then seen people be like, all right, I need to take a week off, man. I'm so mad, you know? And I get it. It's especially in LARP, you're a little more involved, the time of it, that you know, you're like getting that mode and you're getting into the character's skin. So I see where you're coming from. I agree. It's not my perspective, but I can understand it, at least when you frame it like that. So fair enough. All right, so we'll actually wrap this one up now. So, but it's led into something really, really cool and a great example of it, because I think this really comes down to, again, knowing your players. And then if you know your players and they're okay with this, is to make sure that, one, you're not stacking things so much to where it's a foregone conclusion about who's going to win in a conflict between one player versus another. And then also, when it does come to a head, that it's actually driving towards something that reinforces the theme of the game and has some kind of climax and conclusion. And I would point exactly right towards the Sam and Frodo moment, where the crumbs get laid on him and then he goes back up the mountain after leaving Frodo behind to ultimately save him from the spider, which is a really, really cool payoff moment. And just think about what that moment would look like at your table if that developed organically. Like, that would be a great moment of triumph that I would imagine that your players would talk about, you know, weeks, months, maybe even years down the road, about like, oh, do you remember that game we played where you did the thing and then I did and then I was so mad, and then you know, yeah, those are the moments that we live for as game masters and storytellers, is to sort of set those pieces in place to sort of hopefully lead our players through those roadblocks to ultimately that final payoff. So right on. Well, if you have any thoughts about this, about how it has worked, or tremendous disasters that you've had at your table, because we all have stories about those, about what has happened at your table and what worked and what hasn't worked, and any secrets that you might have, feel free to hit us up on our Facebook group, Just One More Fix on Facebook, or on Twitter at Just One More Fix, where you can email me, James at Just One More Fix, and we'll give you a shout out here on the show. Otherwise, you can support us over at patreon.com/JustOneMoreFix and get access to all of our raw audio, pre-shows, and zine and print or PDF format. You can also head over to our Kickstarter at Kickstarter.com and search Zine Quest or Three Sisters. It'll be linked in the show notes, and you can support us there for our zine and help us. Bleh. And there you go. That Jaeger glass is a little too full, man. and help us push towards our stretch goals and bringing that Kickstarter to a conclusion, even though it is already successful, because all of you supporters and backers out there are awesome. So head over there, check that out, and be awesome like all of our Kickstarter supporters and our patrons, like Alan White, Simon McNair, Alistair H., Timothy Barra, Hector Trelane, Tiziana Furlano, and the OG Todd Olson. As you know, we remember the Gun and Geek Network, so you can head over to gunandgeeknetwork.com and check out some of the awesome geek content they have over there. I think that'll do it for this week, and we will see you all next week. Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at Incompetech.com. You can support us at Patreon.com/JustOneMoreFix, or follow us on Twitter at Just One More Fix.